I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You said the first thing about taking a book as a proof for your belief. You said no internal contradictions. How well do you know this book? I got this from your friend the other day. It's the Bible for all of you who don't know. I don't know which version it is. I don't know who's writing, who decided what to put it in here. John, we'll read John 1:17, 18. Do you know this one? I'll read what it says here. It says, no one has ever seen God, but God is the one and only who is at the Father's side has made him known. Right here, it says, no one has ever seen God, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You believe that? You take that? You want to read it? That's your book. This is what you take.
You bet.
Right here, same chapter, John 5:19.
Right.
Jesus, it says here, Jesus gave them this answer. I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing. No one sees, he only does what he sees. Internal contradiction. So then this book has internal contradictions. Can we agree on that? Oh, you don't say yes or no answers. What do you say about this internal contradiction?
One of the basic principles of interpreting any book is you have to read in context. And obviously, when you read John chapter 1, the main point is Jesus is God in human form. He begins. Ma'am, am I allowed to answer you or not?
But you're not making sense. You say the same
well,
thing
then why are you wasting your time standing here talking to me if I'm not making sense?
Because look at all these people here who have questions. There's
fine, then why don't you let me go on to other people? If I don't make sense, ma'am, why do you waste your time?
Why am I going to let you misguide them with your misguidance?
Oh, I see. So you have to sort of be a parasite who comes in here and just feeds off the people who are listening to me talk?
Absolutely, why not? You've already made a fool of yourself here anyways.
Why, that's pretty sad. Why can't you just be open and honest and have an honest dialogue?
Let me explain this.
Yep, go ahead. Okay.
Explain this.
Thank you.
Okay.
John chapter 1. John begins with the words, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Crystal clearly, John 1:1 is stating the deity of Christ. The word there is Christ. The Greek word is logos. Obviously, by reading John 1, you know he's talking about Christ. Obviously, he's hearkening right back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, which says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. John is taking that and putting it in Greek. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Nobody has seen God. I haven't seen God. You haven't seen God. But the claim of John is, and the claim of Jesus is, that he is God, revealing himself in human form. That's clearly, unmistakably what John 1 is teaching. And you don't have to have a PhD in New Testament. Just read it yourself, and you'll figure that out.
It's both John. I didn't flip to even a different chapter. It's 2 pages away. Both John saying, one saying no one sees God, the other one saying Jesus sees God. Is it saying Jesus sees himself? Is this something that everyone who reads the Bible
that's exactly right.
as
Jesus
their own
is claiming to be God, revealing himself in human form. That's his claim.
And he sees himself.
No, you're not God.
Why would John write that?
You're not God. What's the difference? Well, if you die and rise from the dead, I will listen very closely to everything you have to say.
Why is that the one thing that you take? Why don't you
Did you see George Washington inaugurated first president of the United States?
Other people did. I trust that.
Good, and other people saw Christ die on a cross, and they saw him risen from the dead.
But they have internal contradictions.
No, there's no contradiction there. We human beings do not see God, but when God chose to become a human being in Jesus Christ, obviously Jesus knew the Father very, very intimately, very, very well.
When God created us, he limited his power by giving us what you call free will.
Correct.
But it doesn't, in the mind doesn't accept for a creator to have limited power. Can you agree with that?
No.
No. Completely disregarding what Jesus said.
No.
When you honestly believe that the human, the innate thoughts, when it comes to what is a creator, they will come up in their head and say, the creator has limited power, the creator has limited knowledge.
That's not what I said. It is possible for an all-powerful God to partially limit his power by creating us free.
But that doesn't mean all-powerful.
If you disagree with the definition, fine. I respect your right to disagree with the definition.
Okay, so then we'll take
but what
it
I'm
somewhere
saying
else.
is,
We'll take it somewhere
what
else.
Jesus insisted is, God is all-powerful, which means his will shall win in the end. But he's partially limited his power by giving us a free will. That's why if I go up to this gentleman, haul back, and send my fist towards his handsome face, God is not going to automatically put plexiglass in between and I bounce off the plexiglass. He's given me a free will. He's given me a hand. I can give the man money to feed him lunch, or I can roll it into a fist and send it crashing into his handsome face. I can do either, can't you?
Yeah, I can hit him if I choose.
But do you honestly think it's God's will for you to hit him?
Absolutely. When we had this discussion before, you said you have free will and you can make the choice to hit him or not hit him. But by free will, you're completely disregarding the option of a limited will. And I asked you before, if you have this free will, you can fly like a bird, you can make the sun come from the west, but you don't have this ability. God did not will for you
Those are
to have
physical
this ability.
limitations you're talking about. You have switched from free will to the limits of gravity.
Not
You're right,
gravity.
I cannot fly through the air because gravity holds me to the ground and I don't have wings like a bird. And I'm not an airplane or a jet. I'm a human being, I don't have the ability to fly. That says nothing about free will. It says a lot about physical limitations.
Which you don't consider to be created by God? So now you're completely...
Of course I believe that's created by God. Gravity's created by God. I am created by God without wings, therefore I cannot fly.
Okay, so when these physical limitations are created by God, isn't it God's will to not create you with wings and to create this thing you call gravity that keeps you on the ground? It's God's will. That's God willed to create these things.
That's correct.
So God also willed for you to not have the ability to do these things. Correct.
Correct.
Yes, correct. So you, with this free will, are now limited by God's will.
Obviously there are limits.
Obviously, your will is limited by the will of God. Completely disregarding, for you just agreed to that.
No.
You just said it.
No, we were talking about physical limits.
That are created
and then we talked
by
about
the will of
a
God.
will that all of us have that enables us to love or to hate, to do good
Still limited
or to do
by
evil.
the will of God. Subject to the will of God.
But God has chosen to give us a precious gift of a
okay.
rational mind and free will.
Okay,
Now
so
He
when
holds
you-
us responsible for how we use those gifts. If I abuse children, I will have to answer to God on a day of judgment.
Absolutely.
If I murder, I will have to answer to God on a day of judgment. But I am free to be a Mother Teresa II or to be an Adolf Hitler II. I have to choose. I have to make up my life. Guys,
So
you don't
when
have
you
to study
say-
for your next exam.
When you say
You can just
choose-
party, party, party. But then you'll flunk, flunk, flunk. And if you go to your professor and say, how could you flunk me? He's going to say, I'm sorry, you answered incorrectly. You flunked. Part of having a free will means you understand there are consequences to my decisions. And I have to learn to live with the consequences of my decision to party, 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 because then I'll flunk, flunk, flunk. That's part of growing up and being an adult.
So can we say that God willed for the existence of time?
God created time.
God created time, and He existed before the creation of time.
Correct.
Okay. He is not subject or bound to time.
Correct.
So when you say that God chose to give us free will, you're saying at some point He didn't give us free will. At another point, He gave us free will. All occurrences in time that God is not subject to.
That would be just as illogical as if I were to say, because God is eternal, God never created human life initially.
No,
That is
no.
baloney. Just because God is eternal does not mean
No.
that we have always existed. Human beings are the creation of God at a point in human history. Scientific evidence is that thousands of years ago, human life began. About 5 billion years ago, the earth began. Just because God is eternal does not mean that we have always existed. Human beings are the creation of God at a point in human history. Scientific evidence is that thousands of years ago, human life began. About 5 billion years ago, the earth began. About 15 billion years ago, the universe began. 20 billion years ago, did God know that He was going to create us? Yes. But just because God knew that He was going to create us did not mean that we existed.
Absolutely.
We didn't exist until God chose to create us. Similarly, when God chose to create us, He chose to give us a free will because He created us to love Him and to love each other. And in order to love, you've got to be free.
But you're attributing change to God, whereas the change that actually happens when a creation is created is a change in that thing. When you say that he decided to do this, he chose to do this, you're saying that there's a change that happens in the self of God that's subject to time, and we already agreed that God existed before the creation of time, and he's not bound or subject to it.
Okay, according to your belief system, who did God love before God created angels and human beings?
This attribute that you call love, you're going to have to define that, because that's not one of the attributes that comes innate in the human being to the existence of God.
Do you believe that God loves?
I don't know what you mean by love. Will I attribute the word uhibbullah? Absolutely, that's written in the Quran. But this attribute of love, you're going to have to define what that means for me.
To love means to actively wish the well-being of someone else. God actively wishes our well-being, Jesus insisted.
But then
that's why he died on a cross to forgive us and to give us life, because he actively wishes our well-being.
That's your excuse when you use that term, God loves everything. That's your excuse to completely disregard God willing for all evil to happen.
You believe God wills murder. I am convinced God does not will murder. God hates murder.
But will
you believe that God wills an adult to abuse a little child.
Attributes.
I am convinced God hates it when an adult abuses a little child.
Okay, I'll agree with you. God ordered us not to murder and not to hate each other and not to commit adultery and not to abuse children. These are things that we were ordered not to do. But God still willed for people to do those things so that we would know what not to do. God willed.
I disagree. And I think Jesus Christ clearly disagrees.
So then
God does not will that I murder so that these people here can say, now I know that murder's wrong.